Well, welcome back to yet another edition of Elevenses. You're watching Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills Rider Training in London, and it's my topical news, controversial views, and biking tips show. And today is a bit of a special one, actually, because we have hit number 50. Who'd have thought it when I started doing this back in March that we'd actually managed to get to 50 shows, but here we are. Anyway, so on with the topics. What have we got to talk about? There's a big jump in UK bike sales today. We'll be talking about the numbers going up. Australian training organisations are also reporting significant increases in learners. £2,000 could net you an electric motorcycle. Is that the first affordable electric bike? We have a sign which appears to thank motorcyclists, but does it really? It's been doing the rounds on social media. More power to your leg with what appears to be a bolt-on Kickstart assister. And I'll finish up with talking about pointless advice to drivers to look in blind spots. So make a brew, grab a biscuit, pull up a chair, stay tuned to the end if you can. If you can't, don't forget you can always catch up later. If you've got anything to say on today's show, don't forget you can use the comment stream here. Add your comment, your question, your feedback, anything you want to say. I will get back to you at the end of the show when I go off air. Suggestions for future items, I'm always happy to put anything in that anybody wants to talk about. That's not a problem. So do drop me a line through the comment stream. Right, okay, so big jump in UK bike sales. Well, as many people have been predicting, myself included, sales of small capacity motorcycles have actually soared with the easing of lockdown and the need for people to get back to work and avoid public transport. You'll probably recall that sales in March, April, May were all badly hit by the pandemic, but June's sales show a significant bounce back. Predictably, though, these sales have been at the lower end of the market. Smaller capacity machines. Sales of 50cc bikes are up 38% on last year's figures, and 125 sales are up more than 46% over the same month last year. So that's a pretty big bump. And this big increase really in sales of scooters and commuter bikes really does suggest that many people have been deterred from using public transport, and that walking and cycling is simply not viable for all. Interestingly, the brands that did well include Lexmoto and Kiwi. They both sold well at the lower capacity end of the market, and they, of course, are Chinese brands, which most motorcyclists treat with some derision, but clearly they're attractive to new buyers. The best-selling machine overall, however, was Honda's perennial PCX 125 scooter. That sold 445 units in total, which is well over twice the number of the next best-selling machine. Slightly surprisingly, perhaps, the 126 to 650 class saw a modest increase, and that was probably fueled by the sales of the new Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. That was, in fact, the best-selling model in class. So in total, June numbers were up nearly 15% on last year, so 13,000 plus bikes sold. But sales of bigger machines were predictably down on last year's numbers, and that probably reflects long-term concern about income for many riders who would buy this kind of machine. Overall, year on year, registrations are still down 25%, so don't think this is a sort of a bonanza for bike shops. It's still very hard times for the motorcycle business. Okay, meanwhile, over in Australia, the training organisations out there are reporting a 20% increase in learners. So this comes from Sydney in New South Wales and the Stay Upright concern, which is apparently the biggest rider training organisation in Australia. And what they're saying is that in New South Wales, they've seen learner training demand jump by over 20% since the 1st of May, when restrictions started to ease across the state. The result, says Stay Upright, is going to be a lot more inexperienced motorcycle riders on the road as traffic increases, and exactly the same is likely to happen here. So some of the points that Annalise Carwood, the general manager, makes are valid. She believes, again, that the spike has been fueled by the pandemic as people look, she says, to reduce expenses by downsizing to two-wheelers and to gain flexibility in terms of mobility. So pretty much the same reasons over here. And she goes on to say, to quote, in New South Wales, the state government supports motorcycle riding by subsidising learner licensing. Therefore, the initial L-plate training sessions are relatively inexpensive, 96 Australian dollars in New South Wales. And many people have looked at getting a motorbike licence now as they suddenly have time to do it. She then goes on to make the same point that applies equally well here. Having a licence does not equate to riding experience. And she says, unlike four-wheel vehicles, riders on their L-plates are free to ride on public roads by themselves immediately following the awarding of the learner licence, and that new inexperienced riders are particularly vulnerable. And once again, the accident stats in the UK show exactly the same. The young riders on small capacity machines, often on L-plates, often only CBT behind them, are vulnerable. So she suggests that places such as public car parks are a great way to gain experience when they're empty and to get the basics of what they've learned in their initial training. She says that riders are responsible for their ongoing training and experience building, and that regular riding is critical to riders becoming more comfortable on the road. So, yeah, again, everything that I say to new riders, go and get some practice, but do it where it's relatively safe. Empty car parks are ideal for practicing manoeuvring. Quiet roads are ideal for putting those manoeuvres into practice along with the skills of riding on the road. So, have a think about that if you are a new rider on CBT. It applies equally to you. So what have we got to say in the rest of the show? Well, in other stories today, I'll be talking about a £2,000 electric motorcycle. Is that the first really affordable one? A social media sign that appears to support motorcyclists but may not be all it seems. A powered Kickstart, which appears to be designed for classic motorcycles, and I will look at the advice to look in blind spots, which appears to have a bit of a blind spot in it, the advice itself. Right, okay, so don't forget you're watching Survival Skills here live with my Elevenses show. It is on every Wednesday and Sunday at 11 o'clock. Do tune in, put date in the diary, and hopefully see you on the next one too. Okay, so where were we? Back to biking in the UK. Is it? Well, sort of. Monday, the 6th of July, it saw the reopening of the test booking system for bike trainers. The DVSA first postponed and then suspended testing altogether back in March. And since then, bike trainers have been unable to book any tests. They just suspended the system completely. So the only people being tested have been key workers. And that has been a fairly hit and miss affair, according to word on the street. It was not as straightforward as saying, here's a key worker I want to test. But anyway, in line with DFT and DVSA statements at the end of last month, training schools should have been able to start making a dent in the backlog of their training on Monday, as the first week's worth of tests were opened up. However, things didn't appear to go smoothly. By midday, social media was full of messages from disgruntled ATBs who'd been completely unable to secure tests. Nothing at all was available, or had only managed to book one or two, but at centres which in some cases were a long, long way from where they were based. And worse was to follow. I'm not an expert on this. I don't run a basic training school, but apparently there are two systems for booking new tests, and the system that the DVSA had announced was open, was quickly saturated, so bike trainers switched to an alternative system, which was also open. And they then received a threatening email at 6 o'clock, fairly strongly worded email telling them that these tests had been cancelled and warning them not to use it again. Many trainers at that point said, well, we weren't told that we couldn't use it, and were predictably not very happy about the tone of the email. Following that, yesterday, there appeared to be some phone conversations and some mixed messages. Some people that training schools talked to within the DVSA said that, in fact, this message was aimed at car instructors and not bike trainers, and that the test booked through it would be able to go ahead. Others were told that they'd be cancelled anyway. So what's happening there is anybody's guess. I dare say we'll get some clarification at some point, but right now, if you're running a basic training school, I really do feel very sorry for you indeed. I mean, obviously, there's a huge demand for tests. People want to get trained up. They want to ride bikes. But, it just seems that anything the DVSA gets involved in always ends up being more complex than it needs to be. What's unclear is whether or not the DVSA were actually able to lay on a full program of tests for the week that was available. Or whether, in fact, the problem is that there are still very few test centres actually open, and very few examiners who are available to run these tests. That is simply, I don't know the answer to that, and I doubt anybody outside the DVSA does. So what if you are looking to get onto two wheels at this moment? What would my advice be to you right now? Well, what I'd say is, if you are hoping to get a big bike license, forget it. It's not going to happen anytime soon unless you get very, very lucky. And normally I would never suggest this, but what I'm going to say is go and get a CBT, because schools are able to deliver these right now with social distancing measures in place. Schools need the work. And then get yourself a 125. And then, having got yourself the bike, get a bit of top-up training. My opinion has always been, having been a CBT instructor for 12 years, that CBT is inadequate preparation for the road, certainly if you're riding in town traffic. So in my opinion, what you learn on some top-up training will be a useful investment, not just in your own safety on your 125, but it will be an investment, and it'll be there ready for your big bike test whenever it is that the DVSA finally sort the system out and tests start becoming available to training schools again. But in the meantime, with that 125, at least you will be mobile. Okay, so while I'm on the topic, I'll just talk for a moment or two about my own Ride to Work course. Now, you'll probably remember that, let me just get the right picture up. Oh, that's the wrong picture. I'll get it there in a minute. There it is. You'll probably remember that I'm started training again as of 1st of June, and I have been running courses for the last month. So I'll just take a moment to tell you about my own Ride to Work course. Now, the idea of this course is that it is a follow-up to basic training, and the idea is it is a session that helps a rider who may not be used to heavy London traffic to adapt to dealing with what the city can throw at them. A lot of people are looking to ride into London to avoid the tube and the buses. As usual, what I would do on these courses is start from, not from the perfect technique side of things, in other words, how we should be doing everything right, but to examine what can go wrong. If we look at mistakes and how they happen, if we look at how people actually fall off motorcycles, that's the way that we can prepare to avoid them. Although we're socially distanced on bikes itself, I think it's important to say that I have adapted my regular training courses to maximize working from home. Now, there's a good reason for that. It's still the official advice. Any work that can be done from home should still be done from home. And it doesn't mean just because we're riding bikes that we should be able to jump straight back on them and go back to riding training courses as normal. I know a lot of riders were out there will be throwing up their hands and saying, how can you teach riding from home? Well, the answer is quite simple. I can move the theory sessions online. And what I would normally deliver sitting over a coffee in a cafe, I can deliver sitting over a cup of tea quite easily via Zoom, much as I'm talking to you at the moment. Trainee can be there on the other end of the line. Now, nobody would question the idea that we can actually learn from watching a video. We can watch YouTube. We can pick things up from YouTube all the time. But the thing is, a video is passive. You're simply listening to what somebody else is saying. The thing about using a system like Zoom is it's interactive. We're not just passive. I'm not just passively talking at you and you're passively listening. It's an active action reaction system. And of course, I have teaching aids prepared as well. I can display photos very much like I've got the photo here at the side of the screen. I can pop those up. I can screen share with you. I can use photos. I can use diagrams. I can use teaching aids of all sorts. I've got a whiteboard. I can share video clips. So it really is a interactive learning environment, and it is a very, very effective one. And best of all, it's actually in the comfort of your own home when you're relaxed and rested. And it's not at the end of even a ride to meet me, when most people are a little bit nervous about how the course is going to go ahead. And it's not an ideal time, in fact, to try and communicate new information. I've known that for a long time, but it's the way training's always been done, and it's the way that people expect it to be done. So it's taken something like the COVID-19 situation to actually have a rethink about this. How's it worked? Well, so far, the feedback on these online theory sessions has been excellent. People have been surprised how effective they are, usually because they've done exactly what I've just talked about, which is discuss theory at the side of the road, on the radio, in a cafe. And finding they can do this online has been a revelation to a lot of people. Similarly, at the end of the session, I would conclude with a debrief, usually at the side of the road, or maybe again over a quick coffee, with a follow-up email. But again, the trainee is now tired at the end of this long on-road session. And beside the bike with traffic going past isn't an ideal environment for getting info over. So switching the debrief to either that evening when we're home, or even the following day, has proven more beneficial than even I thought it was going to be. I can use Zoom again to show you on-bike videos. We can discuss particular incidents from the ride. I can use my whiteboard. I can go back with those other teaching aids, whatever we need. We have the time to discuss the incident in detail. Neither of us are in a hurry to get home. And last but not least, moving all this online means that the online sessions can be shorter and punchier. Now, I've always known that much of our rider training on road is far too long. It starts with CBT, which is an absolute pressure cooker of a day, often starting at sort of 8:30 in the morning and maybe not finishing till 5:30 in the evening. It's a long, long day for the instructor. And if the instructor's knackered, and I usually was at the end of a CBT, the trainee is absolutely shattered. Now, it doesn't get any better when we move on to advanced training either, but people expect day-long sessions. If you've ever done a track day where you have to turn up and sign on at 8 in the morning, and you probably don't pack up till 5 in the afternoon, you'll know how exhausted you are by the end of it, and you still got to ride your bike home. So I've always tried to keep the courses fairly short. So I've always kept them down to 5 hours, 10 till 3. But what this means is I can shorten them even more, and I can get down to what I think is a pretty optimum time for on-road training, which is 2 hours. And the big plus of this at the moment with the COVID-19 situation is it means we can avoid the need for a mid-ride break at a crowded cafe. And I've made the same changes, of course, to my Ride for Fun training sessions on rural roads. Now, I won't kid you, I need some training work to fill the coffers that have been emptied by lockdown. So if you've been hesitating about booking a course, do take another look at what I offer. As I said, feedback on the courses I've run over the last month have been very, very positive about these changes. So if you're doubtful about the benefits you could gain from one of my modified courses, and you've been putting it off because you're worried that there's not enough time on the road, put that behind you, give it a go. I've reduced the prices fairly dramatically as well to give you the option to do this at a relatively inexpensive rate. Moreover, there will be people out there who are concerned about the risks of COVID and doing a training course. So again, have a look at what I've done to socially distance you from me and to maximize your own safety on these training courses. So as I've said, extraordinary times, they do require some extraordinary training. Okay, right. So what else we got? The first affordable electric motorcycle, perhaps that's coming up in just a moment. We will be looking again at, I'm just trying to remember what else I've got in the story. Oh yeah, the electric Kickstarter, and then I'll look at the blind spot over blind spot advice on riding. Okay, now just have a quick look at this item here. That was one I wanted to show you first of all. I mentioned that this banner has been going round social media, saying apparently that motorcyclists are being thanked for saving a seat on buses. Have another look at it. That to me looks remarkably like it's been photoshopped. The interesting thing, of course, is that where I saw it, it came with a statement saying this isn't photoshopped, but it damn well looks like it to me. Unfortunately, it would be really nice if people were giving motorcyclists a sort of big thank you for getting out there and making life easier for everybody else. But I fear that that one's a spoof. Okay, so next one up was the electric Kickstart. Now, this is an interesting device. If you've ever kickstarted a motorcycle, you'll know that it's not always as easy as it could be. I can still remember a session stood at the side of the road, best part of 30 minutes, trying to restart a hot 400cc Suzuki single. It was a real mission trying to get that bike started when the engine was warm. And after I stalled it, I basically was booting the damn thing for 30 minutes. Kickstart bikes, a bit of a mystery for most of us these days with electric starters, but they kind of have quirks. You have to learn just how much choke to use depending on the weather, whether you need to open the throttle or keep it closed, how fast you actually need to kick the machine over, and they all start slightly differently. So I guess what this device here does, let's just blow it up so you can see a little bit clearly. It appears to be attached to the Kickstart boss, and presumably what it does is it detects the movement of the kickstart as the rider begins to kick it and then provides additional power. But looking at it, it's probably a vacuum pump of some sort, hydraulics. I don't know, but there was no further information on this, but quite an interesting device all the same. Okay. Electric motorcycles, I've been talking about those as well over the months. Now, somewhere I've got a picture of an electric motorcycle. No, I haven't. I've obviously forgotten to put it up. All right, well, never mind. I've got the video link up there for you to look at. One of the problems with electric motorcycles generally is that they have hit the premium end of the market. If you go and look at the Harley-Davidson Livewire, the price is eye-watering. So this is a German startup called Black Tea, and what they're doing is they're putting the final touches to the bike ready for its launch. Now, the Black Tea, they're calling it a moped, is a lightweight electric two-wheeler. The styling is supposedly 70s era scrambler. And they're calling it a moped, presumably because the power controller can be used to limit the output of the machine, so it will drop into the L category that can be ridden on a car license. But in full power format, the bike actually features a 5 kilowatt motor at 6.7 horsepower. And the interesting thing is it puts out 180 Newton meters of torque. Now, to put that into perspective, the Honda CBR 125R puts out 13.6 horsepower, so basically double what this black tea produces, and it produces a maximum torque of 10.6 Newton meters. So that's barely a tenth of what the electric bike can produce. So expect some fairly rapid acceleration off the line. The video apparently demonstrates the bike pulling a wheelie. So for urban riding, 50 miles per hour top speed will be plenty. The battery is removable, gives you a range of about 40 miles, which again should be okay for urban use. It's got a halo LED lights, hydraulic brakes, and there's an optional second battery pack which would extend the range. So how much? That's the big question, isn't it? Well, the black tea is being introduced on Indiegogo, which is one of the crowdfunding sites, and they're offering a 50% pre-order discount, and that brings the price down to €2,000. No word on shipping dates, and you always need to be a little bit cautious on sites like Indiegogo, because some of the things that are crowdfunded never actually go into production, and there could be a problem getting your money back. But quite frankly, at €2,000, if you've got a few bob to spare and you want to get into a small electric motorcycle, it might be something to think about. All right, okay. So don't forget, you're watching Kevin Williams here with Elevenses. If you want something to read, you can still head over to my Lulu site and pick up some paperback books. Over there, they're still on sale. The site's been revamped and is up and running again. And I want to finish off with a rider training tip. And what I want to talk about today is some potentially dangerous advice. Drivers, check blind spots. It sounds sensible, doesn't it? But the problem is, when it goes wrong, that advice frames the car driver as the wrongdoer, the transgressor who's making the mistake and putting the rider at risk. And some years ago, I featured a video by a guy who had been almost taken out by a driver here in the UK. And what had been happening was he'd been sliding up the near side of a vehicle when that driver cut across his lane and off to an exit. The driver obviously moved into what she thought was empty space. Now, predictably, of course, he had his on-bike camera on hand. And so the incident immediately went up on YouTube, and you could see his response to the incident. It was a rev bomb, lots of in-helmet shouty stuff, and some gesticulations. And his verbal response on the video was much the same as his response in real life, But he concluded with the line, "Drivers, look in your effing blind spots." Now, think about that for a moment. What is a blind spot? Well, by definition, it's somewhere that we cannot see into. That is why it is a blind spot. So how on earth are you supposed to look into it? I made that point when I featured the video here on my Facebook channel. The trouble is, if we give that advice to drivers, which is faulty in the first place, it leads motorcyclists to believe it's the driver's responsibility to look for bikes that are sitting in the driver's blind spot. And so, by extension, riders come to believe that it's the rider's fault for this error. Now, if the rider's young and inexperienced, and I was at one time, and I firmly believe this too, and you've got no time behind a steering wheel, then it's easy to forgive the rider for misunderstanding just how easy it is for a bike to vanish from view in the blind spot. It's only when you drive that you actually begin to appreciate how easy it is to see what's going on while you're riding a motorcycle. After all, you have this big open space in front of your helmet, which barely blocks anything, even of peripheral vision. And all we have to do to see is turn our head, and we've got a clear view, completely unobstructed view. I didn't realize how difficult it is to see out of a car until I drove one. I didn't drive a car till much, much later than I started riding. And I really, really didn't appreciate how difficult it is to see anything to the left when you're sitting in the driving seat of a van until, again, I drove one up in London. And then I realized that even with the passenger side mirror over here being set up as best as possible, you simply can't see anything on the left-hand side of the vehicle. It is completely blind because there is a bloody great sheet of steel in the way. And that means moving left on any kind of road is tricky. You cannot see what's in the blind spot, even with that mirror. And I shouldn't even have to warn anybody about the dangers of blindsiding a truck or bus driver. But few riders, and that includes many of us who drive cars, we fail to appreciate just how awful the view from a modern car actually is. Think about it. The view as we sit in the driver's seat is compromised by headrests on the seats around us. It's compromised by passengers in those seats. And above all, it's compromised by the very structure of the vehicle. The pillars at the front of the windscreen block the view to the front and to the sides, but the B pillar beside our head blocks our view laterally. And then at the rear, the C pillar is much thicker than it used to be, because now it's an integral part of supporting the roof in a rollover crash. And the window at the rear, which used to be sort of fairly same size as they are on the other car, the front, has now shrunk. And if you look at the rear of the car, if there is a little quarter light window at the rear, it's almost invisible. And look at the rear windscreen as well. Rear windscreens have shrunk. They haven't got bigger. They've shrunk. They've got dramatically as the structure of the car has strengthened. So however you move your head around inside the car, there is no way that we can get a clear view all around the vehicle. And mirrors, what about mirrors? Well, people say, look in your mirrors. Well, look in the mirror and see what you're seeing in the mirror. And what you'll see is that a modern mirror on a car is tiny. It's designed to be aerodynamic and to improve fuel consumption figures. It's not designed to see behind you. If you don't believe me, go and have a look at a transit van and compare the size of the mirror. Transit van mirror is by comparison vast. It's tall, it's broad. And the reason for that is you need them to back up. If you look at a modern car, a lot of them are now fitted with reversing mirrors. Reversing cameras, I should say, and that's no coincidence. It's because you can't see anything behind the car in the mirrors or out the rear window. So on my training courses, it's one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about. It's about staying out of blind spots. It's about knowing where you cannot be seen. And the starting point is easy. If you cannot see the driver's head, then there is no way that driver can see you. So I regularly encourage riders who sort of worry, about this and think I'm sort of exaggerating the problem, to go and sit in a modern car and have a good look round to see what they can see. Even drivers riders who are regular drivers often fail to appreciate just how restricted the view out of a modern car actually is. And then I remind these riders that, of course, any position that puts them into the driver's blind spot is risky, because the driver may not see you. Anytime we're actually alongside another vehicle, we risk being squished if the driver changes position, as that rider found out in the video that I talked about. And that's always likely to happen near junctions, and it's likely to happen if the left-hand lane in front of us is also empty. People are likely to move into the lane that we're in. So don't get yourself into a position where you're at risk. And that's the thrust of my training. We need to look after ourselves on the road and not rely on anyone else to look after us. That's what I learned as 16 years as a courier taught me that. So here we are in 2020, and people working in rider training still giving riders the opposite message. Annalise Kaywood, the general manager of Stay Out Rides in Australia that I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, she says that inexperienced riders are trained to avoid driver blind spots. So far, so good. But then she mixes her message by saying that car and truck drivers need to remember that they need to be aware of their blind spots, with more people expected to ride and drive back to work rather than catching transport. Again, it's the wrong message. It's sending out this idea that it's the driver's problem. And I'll come away with the message that my friend in the video that I mentioned earlier believed, that the driver didn't look hard enough, not because the rider put himself in a position where he was almost impossible to see. This isn't me saying, as I've been accused of in the past, that drivers don't need to bother to look for bikes. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that we must not be giving riders the impression that drivers can see through brick walls, because they can't. You know, it doesn't matter if they look hard enough. If there is a big chunk of steel in the way, they will not see a motorcycle. So the message right around the world, doesn't matter where we are, should always be give riders the information that there are times that they will not be seen no matter what happens. And then it's down to us to put ourselves in a position where it doesn't matter if the driver doesn't see us. Right, okay, that was a public information rant. So that's it for today. We are back on Sunday with show number 51, which, as I said, fairly remarkable number. I never expected to be going this long. If you've enjoyed the show, you can head over to my Ko-fi page. You can find an increasingly large number of back catalogue articles from my Facebook page going up there. There are currently well over 150 in place. You can support me for £3. You can become a subscriber for just £3 a month, and you can open up all this content and a lot more besides. Okay, hopefully see you Sunday. Thanks for watching today. Let me know if you've enjoyed the show, and if you've got any questions, fire away and I'll do my best to answer them. But for now, bye.